June 1944. The morning light broke in fragments across the hedgerows of Normandy. Damp air clung to the earth like smoke, and every step through the thick underbrush crackled with risk. From the shattered village of Bretteville-sur-Laise to the narrow lanes leading toward Cannes, silence ruled the front, somewhere beyond the fun. Hedgerow, a single rifleman, waited, his scope fixed through a slit in tangled leaves finger. Steady on the trigger, he had been there since dawn alone. German sniper tasked with halting the slow, grinding advance of Canadian infantry pressing inland from Juno Beach. But today, something had changed across the line in a nearby orchard too. Canadians moved with deliberate calm there. Faces were streaked with mud and shadow, their number 4 MKIT rifles slung low. These were the sharpshooters of the Canadian Army, men trained to hunt the hidden hunters. Every movement was silent, methodical, every breath measured. The Germans had once believed they owned the shadows of Normandy. By the end of that summer, they would learn what it meant when the hunters became the hunted. When Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the world witnessed the largest amphibious invasion in history for the men of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. Their sector, Juno Beach, became a crucible of grit and determination. By nightfall, they had pushed farther inland than any other Allied force that day, but the victories of the first 24 hours were only the beginning. What lay ahead would be an unforgiving test not of massed armies, but of patience, precision, and survival. The lush countryside of Normandy was deceptive. Known as the bocage, it was a tangled maze of earthen embankments, thick hedgerows, and narrow sunken lanes. Tanks could barely maneuver, infantry visibility was reduced to a few dozen meters, and every bend in the road, every gap in a hedge could hide a sniper's scope or a machine gun nest. The Germans, veterans of years of defensive warfare, understood this terrain instinctively. Wehrmacht and Waffens units retreating from the beaches melted into the bocage, fortifying farmhouses and villages. Among them were specialized sniper detachments, often drawn from the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and the elite Fallschirmjäger units. These were disciplined marksmen trained to stall the Allied advance by sowing fear, confusion, and paralysis among infantry platoons. For the Canadians, the early weeks after D-Day were punishing. Every advance came at the cost of an unseen shot. A section leader peering around a corner would collapse in silence. A signalman adjusting his radio antenna would fall, struck from hundreds of meters away. The snipers' rifles, often the 792 mm Carabiner 98K, fitted with Zeiss optics, turned Normandy's hedgerows into killing fields. The Canadians quickly learned that brute force could not solve this kind of warfare. Mortar fire and airstrikes were useless against single hidden shooters. It required patience, observation, and skill traits embodied in a new kind of soldier, the sharpshooter. The roots of Canada's sniper tradition stretched back to the First World War, when men like Francis Pega-Magabo and Henry Norwest became legends for their deadly precision. But in Normandy, this tradition evolved into something more systematic. Each infantry battalion began forming specialized woman sniper teams, a shooter and an observer, trained in fieldcraft, camouflage, and counter-sniper operations. These teams operated independently, moving ahead of the main line to identify, stalk, and neutralize enemy snipers. Their weapons were purpose-built: the Lee Enfield No. 4 MKIT, a finely tuned rifle fitted with a No. 32 scope and capable of near-pinpoint accuracy at 800 yards. To the German sharpshooters, it was a formidable equal. By mid-June 1944, sniper duels had become an invisible war within the war. In the hedgerows around Carpiquet, Cannes, and Tilly-Zirsel's battles sometimes lasted days, not measured in territory gained, but in who survived the next hour of stillness. The Canadian approach differed from the Americans and the British. While U.S. units often employed sharpshooters in a more general support role, the Canadians treated counter-sniper warfare as a personal mission of retribution. Every time a platoon lost a man to a hidden shot, a sniper pair was dispatched. To track the source, they studied angles, bullet strikes, and distances like detectives reconstructing a crime scene. Then they would wait sometimes for an entire day for the German to move again. For many, this was not about revenge. It was about restoring balance in a war that often felt unfairly one-sided. Against the unseen, they became the eyes of their comrades. Against the patient, they became patience itself. And by the time the Canadians reached the outskirts of Caen, something extraordinary was happening. German snipers, once the apex predators of the battlefield, were being hunted in return. The tide in the bocage was beginning to turn. By late June 1944, the battle for Normandy had evolved into one of attrition. The Canadian and British armies faced a determined German defense anchored around the city of Caen, a vital objective that controlled access to the interior of France. What began as a rapid breakout plan turned into a brutal grinding siege of hedgerow stone walls and shattered villages. It was in this crucible that the duel between German snipers and Canadian sharpshooters reached its deadliest form. The Germans had mastered concealment, digging spider holes beneath hedgerows or hiding within church towers and haylofts. They learned to camouflage their muzzle flashes with wet cloth or to shoot from beneath vehicles and rubble. In towns like Buron-Authie and Carpiquet, they turned each building into a fortress, every window a possible death trap. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was particularly notorious, composed largely of fanatical young soldiers. They used snipers not just as tactical assets, but as psychological weapons. They knew the effect one well-placed shot could have, how it could halt an entire platoon, delay an assault, or drain morale. Some German snipers even left mocking notes or helmet decoys to lure their pursuers. The Canadians adapted quickly. Veteran units like the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, the Regina Rifles, and the Royal Winnipeg Rifles began integrating sniper intelligence into their daily patrol routines. Observers would mark suspicious flashes on maps, triangulate shots, and coordinate with artillery spotters to flush out enemy positions. When they found a suspected nest, a sniper team was sent in, often crawling for hours through mud and hedgerow to get a clean line of sight. Canadian sharpshooters moved like ghosts. Their camouflage was a patchwork of burlap netting and foliage blending seamlessly into the bocage. They spoke little, they ate little. Their rifles, tuned with surgical precision, became extensions of their will. Every pull of the trigger carried intent, not rage, but a quiet necessity. When Canadian sniper Sergeant Harold Marshall of the Regina Rifles would later recall the eerie intimacy of these encounters. "You could almost feel them watching you," he said. "You'd study a hedgerow for an hour, then see just a flicker, maybe a bit of glass. You'd squeeze off a shot, and sometimes that was it. Sometimes it wasn't." The Germans respected their adversaries'. Reports captured by Allied intelligence in July mentioned Canadian snipers as particularly troublesome and noted that they displayed extraordinary patience. For the first time, the Wehrmacht realized that the Allies had not only matched their sniper doctrine, but were surpassing it in efficiency and adaptability. As the Canadians pressed toward Caen, the duels intensified during Operation Windsor and Operation Charnwood. In early July, sniper fire dominated the ruined streets. In some sectors, more men were killed by single-aimed shots than by artillery. Entire days passed where the front line barely moved, not because of lack of will, but because no one dared expose themselves. But even amidst the brutality, there was a strange kind of mutual recognition. Snipers on both sides often engaged in silent duels, lasting hours each, waiting for the other to blink first. A glint of light, a shift of foliage, a single misplaced breath could decide life or death. By August 1944, as the Allies encircled German forces in the Falaise pocket, the tables had turned completely. The once elusive German sharpshooters now found themselves hunted relentlessly. Many were captured or killed during the chaotic retreat. The Canadian snipers, by then hardened and precise, had transformed from defenders into predators, mastering the art of counter-sniper warfare. The Germans, who once stalked the hedgerows with impunity, were now the Ones crawling through mud, fearing the unseen scope trained upon them. The battle for Normandy had forged a new breed of soldier, disciplined, patient, and deadly silent. And as the fields of France fell quiet after the closing of the Falaise pocket, one truth echoed through every survivor's memory in Normandy: no shadow was safe. Sniper warfare in Normandy evolved faster than almost any other combat technique of the Second World War. What began as a traditional form of harassment, lone marksmen halting enemy advances, quickly became a duel of intellect and nerve. The Canadians, after their initial encounters with hidden German sharpshooters, redefined their entire approach to close quarters warfare. Traditional infantry tactics no longer worked. Mortar and machine guns could suppress, but not eliminate, a sniper who was hidden deep behind hedgerows. Each German rifleman was not only a marksman, but a tactician, using terrain, timing, and psychology as weapons. He would often fire once and relocate instantly, leaving behind confusion and fear. To counter this, the Canadians created a rhythm of patience. Small reconnaissance patrols moved ahead under cover of night, identifying likely sniper nests based on spent cartridges, shell impact directions, or even broken twigs where a shooter might have lain. Sharpshooters learned to think like their enemies, to become invisible within the same terrain that once trapped them. By July 1944, counter-sniping was no longer improvisation, it was doctrine. Commanders began assigning sharpshooters not as individual specialists, but as vital assets in every company's operational plan, their goal to suppress or eliminate German marksmen before they could cripple the advance. Every duel was part of a larger rhythm of adaptation, the invisible chess game that defined the bocage. War beneath the hedgerows, the battle between snipers, became as much about craftsmanship as about courage. Technology, quiet, simple, and deadly, defined who lived longer. The Germans entered Normandy with years of sniper experience and refined equipment. Their carabiner 98K rifles, chambered in 792 mm, were fitted with high-quality Zeiss or Ajax scopes, capable of extraordinary clarity. Each rifle was hand-selected for accuracy, and every marksman was trained to maintain stealth under fire. To many Allied soldiers, the German sniper rifle was a symbol of cold precision, an almost mythical weapon. But the Canadians arrived with their own masterpiece, the Lee Enfield. No 4MK IT, built upon the reliability of the Lee Enfield system, the fastest bolt action rifle of the war. The sniper variant was tuned by Holland & Holland, a London gunsmith, renowned for crafting fine hunting rifles. The rifle scope, the number 32, offered excellent light transmission and rugged reliability, giving Canadian marksmen a crucial edge in low visibility. Combat. Equally important was ammunition standardization. The 303 British cartridge, while slower than the German 792 mm, produced less muzzle flash, a critical advantage in dense hedgerows where a single spark could betray a shooter's location. And rifles, both sides employed field innovations. German snipers used range-finding reticles etched into their optics, while Canadian observers developed makeshift periscopes and mirror devices to locate enemy glints without exposing themselves. Even camouflage reflected ingenuity. Canadians smeared dark mud mixed with grease over exposed skin, while Germans shredded burlap and grass into their tunics. Every tool became a survival mechanism, and yet in the end, it wasn't the rifle or scope that determined victory, it was the man who used it best. If artillery broke bones, snipers broke nerves. Their true weapon was not the bullet, but the silence that followed it. For Canadian infantry advancing through Normandy, the fear of unseen fire was constant. A soldier could march all morning without incident, only to see a comrade fall wordlessly beside him. The shot came from nowhere, no flash, no sound, just the crack of inevitability. Every field, every window, every church steeple became a potential death trap. German snipers understood this power intimately. They knew that a single shot could immobilize an entire company. They fired not only to kill, but to slow, to make men crawl rather than stand. In response, Canadian sharpshooters turned that same fear back upon the enemy. When German soldiers began realizing they were being watched when they saw comrades fall from invisible bullets, the confidence that once defined their defense began to erode. Wehrmacht. Diaries recovered near Cannes spoke of Allied marksmen who never miss of a silent death from the field's psychological warfare, spread like an infection. Soldiers on both sides began moving differently, breathing differently. They learned to avoid open doors, to never stand near windows, to distrust even shadows. For those who lived through it, the sniper war of Normandy was less a battle and more a haunting. Every hour of calm felt temporary, every sound carried suspicion. Germans had once wielded fear as their greatest weapon. In the summer of 1944, the Canadians learned how to wield it better. Among all combat roles in Normandy, none demanded more solitude or more trust than the snipers. The Canadian sharpshooters operated in pairs, one shooter, one observer. Their bond went beyond ordinary military companionship. It was a wordless understanding born in the mud and hedgerows, tested by hours of stillness and inches of danger. Observer was more than a lookout. He was the mathematician, the navigator, and sometimes the conscience, while the shooter focused through the scope. The observer read wind patterns, tracked time, and noted subtle shifts in terrain. He was also the only voice. The sniper could rely on the one who whispered, "Wait." Now in this partnership, communication was stripped to essentials. A nod, a breath, a touch on the sleeve replaced speech. These moments, suspended between tension and release, shaped an intimacy that no one outside the sniper's world could truly comprehend. But that closeness also came with unbearable weight. Each successful mission meant a life taken for many Canadian snipers. The sense of achievement mingled with unease. They were not killing in rage. They were executing duty, and in the stillness that followed each shot, the silence sometimes felt heavier than the trigger itself. As the campaign dragged on, these pairs became legends within their units, respected, sometimes even feared by their own comrades. They embodied patience and precision, yet when they returned from missions, their eyes often carried something others could not read, a quiet that never fully lifted in the chaos of Normandy's close quarters battlefields. Discipline was survival. The Canadian Army's leadership recognized early that sniper warfare demanded more than marksmanship. It required restraint, intellect, and emotional control. Commanders such as Major General Rod Keller of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division issued specific directives to coordinate sniper operations. They understood that sharpshooters were not expendable assets. They were surgical instruments. Snipers received orders not to engage targets impulsively, but to prioritize high-value threats. Enemy officers, observers, and machine gun crews, each shot had to count, each position carefully chosen, each escape route planned. This structured approach contrasted sharply with some German tactics, which often relied on individual initiative. The Wehrmacht's doctrine encouraged its snipers to act autonomously, to hunt freely within their sectors. While this created deadly flexibility early on, it also exposed them to counter-ambushes. Once the Canadians learned their patterns, Canadian leadership also emphasized moral discipline. Snipers were forbidden from shooting medics, prisoners, or civilians under any circumstance, a rule reinforced by the Geneva Convention. It was not merely a legal principle, but a moral one. The Canadian command wanted to ensure that their marksmen remained soldiers, not executioners. Moral clarity became a defining trait of Allied sniper operations. It drew a line, however thin, between professional warfare and personal vengeance. Even amid the hatred and horror of Normandy, that distinction mattered. It reminded the men that their mission was not to destroy indiscriminately, but to restore control in Chaosen. For many German prisoners later captured in France, this discipline left an unexpected impression that even the most precise killers among the Allies fought with rules and humanity. There was something uniquely haunting about the kind of killing that left no face, no sound, no warning. The sniper's war existed in moral ambiguity, clean, precise, but deeply personal. In the fields of Normandy, this question lingered unspoken among both German and Canadian soldiers. What did it mean to take life unseen in light bombardment or firefights? Sniper engagements were Intimate in distance and intent through the scope, the sniper saw everything: the enemy's expression, the moment of realization, the fall. The act was clinical, but the aftermath was deeply human for German snipers, raised in a culture of ruthless efficiency. This moral tension was often buried beneath obedience for Canadians, many of whom came from farms, factories, and small towns. It was harder to ignore after each mission. Some kept diaries reflecting on what they had done. One entry written by a Canadian corporal near Caen reads simply, "We see them as they die. That's what stays with Yetispit." The unease, the necessity remained. Each shot saved lives, friends, brothers, comrades, who might otherwise walk into death. The sharpshooter carried that burden, so others could move forward. In that sense, sniper warfare embodied both the precision and the paradox of modern war. It demanded compassion and detachment, mercy and resolve. It showed the limits of human endurance, not in pain but in silence. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the sniper's role had transcended the battlefield. It had become a symbol of control, calculation, and the fine line between soldier and survivor. The snipers' duels in Normandy were not just contests of skill, they were mirrors of the human condition, reflections of how far patience, fear, and discipline could push men when the world around them had lost all order. The eyes that once hunted from the shadows were now being watched themselves. The duel for Caen, July 8, 1944. By early July 1944, the battle for Caen had reached its breaking point. The city, once a picturesque medieval hub on the Orne River, had become a labyrinth of ruins, smoke, and shattered stone. Every street was contested. Every wall hid an ambush. Canadians were ordered to capture the northern districts of Caen during Operation Charnwood, a final push after weeks of relentless fighting. It was here that the sniper war reached its most dangerous phase. German resistance was fierce. The defenders, primarily from the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and remnants of the 16th Luftwaffe Field Division, fought from cellars, church towers, and sniper nests embedded in debris. Their precision fire pinned down entire companies. The Canadians could advance only a few yards at a time. Among the enemy's most feared weapons were the concealed marksmen perched inside the stone belfries overlooking the Orne. From those heights they commanded the battlefield, firing into open streets, disrupting supply lines, and eliminating officers with ruthless accuracy. Canadians had learned from weeks of bloodshed that direct assaults were suicide. Instead, they turned to their sniper teams, men who knew how to see without being seen. Standoff at St. Contest. Outside the village of St. Contest, north of Caen, a small detachment from the North Nova Scotia Highlanders found itself pinned down by a lone German sniper. For 2 days, he had harassed their every move, striking without warning and vanishing before retaliation. 3 men were already dead. The unit could not advance, and artillery could not risk flattening the position without exposing friendly troops. A Canadian sniper team, Sergeant Harold Marshall and Lance Corporal R.E. Toms, was called forward. They arrived before dawn, crawling through wet grass and rubble, their camouflage darkened by mud and sweat. Hunt was slow and silent. Through binoculars, Marshall studied the fields beyond a half-collapsed barn. There was no glint, no movement, no sound, only an unnatural stillness. Then, a flicker, barely perceptible, a shadow where the light should have fallen. Evenly, Marshall's finger tightened around the trigger of his number 4 MKIT. The distance was roughly 300 yards. He exhaled, waited for the wind to still, and for the single report cracked through the still air. Then silence again. When the platoon advanced minutes later, they found the German marksman dead behind a shattered window, his rifle still balanced on the silhouette. One shot broke the stalemate. The Canadians surged forward, seizing the position. By mid-morning, what had held an entire company for 2 days had been undone by 2 men and a single bullet. It was a pattern that repeated across Normandy. Isolated duels tipping the balance of battles. The German advantage of concealment was no longer absolute. The hunters had begun to feel eyes upon them. The bell tower fell silent a few miles east in Caen's northern quarter, the Royal Winnipeg. Rifles were fighting block by block. A sniper's nest in the tower of St. Pierre Church had been tormenting them for hours. Claiming 2 officers and halting a full platoon instead of calling artillery, the Canadians turned again to their sharpshooters. Sergeant John Jack McNeil, a quiet, methodical sniper, known for his near-perfect accuracy, was given the mission. Positioned himself inside a ruined hotel across the street, using debris as cover. He crawled to the upper floor, adjusted his scope, and waited for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. Then a brief shimmer of glass from the church's upper window. McNeil fired once, and the glint disappeared a few seconds later. A helmet rolled down the stone ledge. It was over that afternoon. Canadian infantry stormed the church and found 2 German snipers. Both struck cleanly through their scopes. McNeil's calm precision had saved dozens of men from further losses. When Cannes finally fell on July 9th, the city's ruins bore witness to this invisible war, a contest fought not with battalions but with patience and skill. Victory was not just tactical, it was psychological. For the first time since D-Day, Canadian infantry advanced without fear of unseen death. Lurking behind every wall, the Germans, once masters of the hidden kill, were being forced into retreat across the front. Wehrmacht commanders noted the Shift 1 captured report from the 12th SS Panzer Division. Read: "The enemy's marksmen are extraordinary. They move with the discipline of our own. Many of our best are lost to them. We can no longer stalk without being stalked." Duels for Cannes marked the turning point of the sniper war. What had begun as a battle of attrition in the hedgerows now became a campaign of precision dominance. Mastering patience, the Canadians had taken away the Germans' greatest weapon for the fields of Falaise. August 1944. By August, the tides of war in Normandy had turned irreversibly. The Allies were closing the jaws of a trap, the Falaise pocket, encircling tens of thousands of German troops. Amid the chaos of retreat and encirclement, the sniper duels entered their final and most desperate phase. The Canadians, now battle-hardened and cautious, pushed south through farmland littered with burnt-out panzers and wrecked wagons. Every tree line and barn could hide an enemy rifle. But unlike the early days of June, Canadian units now advanced with an eerie calm. Sniper pairs moved first, crawling through orchards and ditches, eyes scanning for movement behind them. Came the infantry, guided by subtle hand signals and whispered coordinates. The lessons of Cannes had been learned: the hunter's patience, the importance of silence, the art of waiting longer than one's enemy. German marksmen, especially from the 12th SS and the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, still fought with skill and courage, yet they were exhausted, cut off, and outnumbered. Ammunition was scarce, radios failed, many had not eaten properly in days. The Allies tightened. The new sniper warfare shifted from ambush to survival. The German sharpshooters, once proud hunters, were now cornered prey. The last German sniper near Trun on the northern rim of the Falaise pocket, a Canadian patrol from the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, was advancing cautiously along a hedgerow. The village ahead was silent, its streets scorched by bombing. Then a single echoing shot. A young corporal fell, instantly struck through the chest. The men dropped into cover, scanning the windows, hedges, and barns. The sniper had fired from somewhere high, perhaps a church loft or windmill. Within minutes, the Canadians called forward their sniper team. Private James Jim Munn and Corporal William Lawler, 2 men who had fought side by side since June. They spread out, moving low through the brush for nearly an hour. They observed. Then Munn noticed something subtle: a cluster of pigeons taking flight from the old mill tower, startled not by noise, but by the movement of someone inside. Death. 2 Canadians waited. The next time the rifle cracked, Munn caught a glimpse of muzzle flash through a narrow slit. He steadied his scope, exhaled, and fired. The sound of a falling rifle echoed down the stone shaft. When the patrol finally reached the tower, they found a German sniper, no older than 20, lying beside his Mauser, his hand still clutching the sling in his pocket. A photograph of his family. It was a haunting moment. The silent, deadly duel that had defined Normandy's hedgerows had ended not with triumph, but with a quiet recognition of shared humanity. Young men on both sides, trained to be unseen, now facing the same fate. The collapse of the German lines. Mid-August, the Falaise pocket had become a graveyard of the Wehrmacht. Allied artillery, air power, and encircling infantry annihilated what remained of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army. Amid this collapse, sniper warfare lost its tactical edge. There was no longer time or ground to hold. German commanders ordered surviving sharpshooters to abandon their nests and fight as infantry. Many refused, knowing that open movement was suicide under Allied air supremacy. For the Canadians, the victory came at a terrible cost: thousands of casualties, entire towns flattened, and the lingering memory of invisible duels fought among hedges and ruins. But the outcome was clear: the sniper advantage had shifted permanently. Where once German discipline and training ruled the shadows, now Allied precision and patience dominated. Reports from captured prisoners confirmed it. Your marksmen fight as ours. Once did they have learned everything we knew and more. By the time the Canadians reached the Seine River in late August, the German sniper threat had all but vanished. What remained of the Wehrmacht was retreating in disarray. Toward Belgium, their elite sharpshooters gone, their legends reduced to whispers. Hunters' Reversolve phrase, whispered across Allied lines. "The hunters have become the hunted," was no longer poetic, it was literal truth. In the ruins of Normandy, Canadian snipers had not only survived the most lethal battleground in Western Europe, they had mastered it. Their kills were precise, their presence psychological, their reputation growing faster than any rumor could spread. German troops began avoiding open windows, church towers, or even helmet reflections for fear of unseen eyes. They no longer hunted freely, they hid in official Canadian after-action reports. Snipers were credited not just with individual kills, but with saving entire platoons by neutralizing hidden threats before they could strike. A single shot could turn an entire battle's momentum. Duel that had begun as a contest of skill had become a symbol of adaptation. A quiet war within the war, fought by men whose weapons spoke rarely but decisive. Live story of Normandy sniper battles was more than one of marksmanship, it was a study in evolution. Germans had taught the world the power of concealment and precision, but in Normandy, it was the Canadians who perfected it, transforming a battlefield of fear into one of control. From Cannes to Falaise, every ruined tower, every silent hedgerow bore witness to the same truth. Counting the cost of Sharpshooters, when the guns finally fell silent across Normandy in late August 1944, the beaches that had once echoed with invasion now lay still beneath drifting smoke. The battle was over, but its scars ran deep. More than 209,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. The Germans lost over 400,000, many captured in the Falaise pocket. Yet, beyond these staggering numbers was another, quieter toll: the invisible duel between snipers that had shaped the ground war from June to August. In reports compiled after the campaign, Canadian officers noted how sniper warfare had evolved from isolated encounters into a central element of battlefield control. Each side had entered Normandy believing they understood the rules of precision warfare. By the end, only one side had rewritten them. Germans, once the undisputed masters of concealment and patience, had underestimated the adaptability of their opponents. The Canadians, initially victims of unseen rifles, had transformed into some of the most efficient counter-snipers of the war. Their discipline, sharpened by loss, became doctrine. By August, every Canadian infantry company maintained trained marksmen capable of identifying, stalking, and eliminating German shooters. It was a brutal education paid for with blood. Legacy of Canadian precision military. Analysts studying the Normandy campaign observed an astonishing shift in sniper efficiency. In early June, it often took Canadian patrols hours, sometimes days, to locate a single German marksman. By late July, experienced sniper pairs could pinpoint a sniper's position within minutes. Canadian sharpshooters began incorporating subtle field innovations, improvised camouflage from Normandy vegetation, the use of mirrors to detect glints, and coordination with forward observers and engineers to flush out hidden nests. This wasn't just adaptation, it was evolution in real. Timian, British war correspondent, embedded with the 3rd Canadian Division, described watching a sniper pair at work. They spoke little, they moved less. They simply waited until the battlefield itself seemed to breathe through them. Then one quiet shot, and the danger was gone. This silent professionalism became a hallmark of the Canadian Army's reputation. The transformation from novice to master, achieved not through arrogance, but through relentless observation and discipline. For every German sniper who once terrorized Allied troops from the tree line, there was now a Canadian scope. Watching back, the German reflection-captured Wehrmacht officers would later express disbelief at how swiftly the Canadians had matched, and in some ways, surpassed their own trained snipers in interrogation reports preserved by Allied intelligence. Several German prisoners from the 12th SS Division admitted that advancing under sniper fire had become psychologically unbearable. In account, Redway no longer saw them. We only felt that we were being watched. You could not raise your head, not even for a second. What had begun as a tactical advantage had turned into a liability. German morale, already collapsing under constant air and artillery bombardment, was now being eroded by the silent fear of unseen death. Once feared German snipers had become symbols of futility, isolated, hunted, and eventually overtaken by an enemy who had mastered their own craft. A new doctrine is born in the months following the liberation of France. Allied High Command compiled lessons from the Normandy campaign into official sniper manuals. Canadian experiences, particularly from the 3rd and 2nd Infantry Divisions, heavily influenced new training standards. The key takeaways were clear: snipers must operate as pairs, not solo. Camouflage and patience outweigh rate of fire. Psychological warfare, the ability to dominate through unseen presence, can turn battles. These doctrines would shape Allied sniper training well into the post-war years, influencing operations in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. In essence, Normandy became the crucible from which modern sniper warfare emerged, not through technological superiority, but through human adaptability and resolve. By September 1944, as Allied forces surged toward the Low Countries, the duels of Normandy faded into memory. The fields that once hid snipers now lay open, marked by silent graves. See it in every quiet hedgerow. One could still sense the echoes of that unseen war, the tension, the patience, and the moment when one breath separated life from death. Hidden war within. When the campaign moved beyond Normandy, many Canadian sharpshooters carried more than just their rifles. They carried memories of an invisible war fought in silence. Snipers' role, though tactical in nature, left deep psychological marks. For months, these men had lived in constant tension, caught between stillness and sudden death. Some veterans later described their experience not as heroism but as endurance, a contest of patience against both enemy and military. Psychiatrists who studied returning soldiers noted a distinct kind of fatigue among snipers, not from the noise of battle, but from its absence. The stillness of the hunt, the isolation of the scope, created a burden that lingered long after victory. Despite the quiet trauma, many of these men found pride in their precision, knowing that each shot, each decision had saved the lives of dozens of comrades who could continue advancing inland. Their restraint, their discipline had turned chaos into control. For the Canadians who fought across those fields, the story of Normandy wasn't about triumph alone. It was about mastering fear through focus and matching one's enemy not in hatred but in skill. Changing the face of warfare. Duels in Normandy redefined how modern militaries viewed small unit precision warfare. Before 1944, snipers were often treated as supporting asset specialists on the edge of the battle. After Normandy, they became essential instruments of dominance. Reports from the Canadian and British armies emphasized how sniper units could control entire sectors of the battlefield. Without large-scale artillery or air support, a single well-placed team could pin down a company, suppress an enemy advance, or dismantle a chain of command with surgical efficiency. By 1945, Canadian sharpshooters were among the most respected and feared across the European theater. Their methods influenced American and British sniper schools that emerged in the immediate post-war years. Even the Germans in defeat studied these lessons in debriefings. Surviving Wehrmacht officers acknowledged that the Allied mastery of counter-sniper tactics had neutralized one of their most psychologically powerful tools. From this point forward, the rifle scope was no longer a symbol of fear. It became one of controlled discipline and measured power recognition. After silence for decades, the contributions of Canadian snipers went largely unspoken. The public spotlight often fell on armored divisions, infantry assaults, and grand strategy. The precision shooters who turned the tide in the hedgerows remained shadows in military history, their victories quiet, their names unknown. But in later years, historians began to uncover field reports and testimonies that revealed just how decisive these marksmen had been. Archival materials from the Canadian War Museum and the Directorate of History and Heritage showed entire German sniper networks neutralized by small Allied teams within days. Some of these men would later train new generations of soldiers, passing on the lessons learned among the hedgerows: how to read wind in the trees, how to measure distance by instinct, how to wait for a single heartbeat before a shot. Her influence extended beyond the battlefield. Modern marksmanship, peacekeeping operations, and even law enforcement sniper programs trace their lineage to those quiet men who reversed the balance of fear in Normandy. End of the hunter myth. The Battle of Normandy did more than liberate France. It redefined the psychology of the warrior, the myth of the invincible German sniper. The unseen hunter who controlled the battlefield through terror ended in those dense bocage fields. In its place rose a new reality: that discipline could defeat instinct, and that patience could be more powerful than aggression, turning the enemy's own weapon of fear against him. The Canadians had achieved something larger than tactical victory. They had rewritten the language of war. No longer would the sniper be seen only as a lone predator in the Canadian tradition. Born of Normandy, he became a protector, precise, controlled, deliberate. When the last hedgerow fell silent and the war moved east, a lesson remained etched in the soil of France. Even in war, mastery is not about who strikes first, but who waits longest. In the calm after Normandy, the land healed slowly. Grass grew over foxholes, and wildflowers reclaimed the fields. Where marksmen once lay still waiting for the smallest flicker of motion, the rifles were silent now, but the lessons of that quiet duel endured, written not in blood alone, but in discipline. Confrontation between German snipers and Canadian sharpshooters was never just about bullets and scope lenses. It was a contest of will, of observation, of endurance, under unimaginable pressure. Both sides fought with courage, but one side learned faster. The Canadians proved that adaptability, the ability to learn amid chaos, could overcome even the most experienced adversary. In the years that followed, military historians would look back on the Bocage campaign not simply as a battle for territory, but as the birthplace of modern precision warfare. The methods developed by those sniper teams, their teamwork, communication, and respect for patience, became foundational to modern doctrines that value accuracy over aggression. And yet beneath all the tactical brilliance, there was something deeply human about this reversal of roles. The hunter becoming the hunted. It spoke to the fragility of certainty in war, to the idea that no man, however skilled or ruthless, can claim mastery over chaos for long. The Canadians' victory was not measured in the number of enemy rifles silenced, but in the moral clarity. It revealed that discipline and control, not hatred, define true strength. Today, when visitors walk through the quiet lanes of Normandy, they pass by hedgerows that once echoed with that unseen duel. Few would guess the fear that lingered there, the patience that defined those hours, or the transformation that took place beneath the canopy of leaves. But if one listens closely to the wind, to the rustle of branches, they might still sense it: the stillness, the waiting, the moment before a single deliberate shot changed the balance of power. In that silence, the story of Normandy's snipers still breathes, a reminder that even in war's darkest hour, discipline can be the most powerful weapon of all.